Right. Welcome, California Democrats. Thank each and every one of you for being here with us to our weekly Prop Talk, the opportunity for all of us to come together and to talk about the positions of the California Democratic Party on some important causes that will be on our ballot on November 3rd. My name is Rusty Hicks. I'm honored to be the chair of the California Democratic Party, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be here with all of you this evening. 41 days to go. 41 days until we have the opportunity to take back our democracy, to take back our country. What we have experienced in recent months and in many ways in recent years. A pandemic on top of a pandemic on top of a pandemic. We are experiencing a global healthcare crisis. We're experiencing an economic downturn, the ravages of climate change, an awakening to racial injustice experienced by communities of color and particularly Black Americans all across this nation, as well as voter suppression that we are seeing at the highest levels coming out of the White House, out of Republicans in Congress and legislatures and conservative groups across the country. And so while we're going to talk about some important initiatives and propositions tonight, it's important that each and every one of us make a plan to vote to get our friends, our family, our neighbors, our coworkers, anybody and everybody that we know to ensure that they cast a ballot and cast that ballot early. Today on Prop Talk, we're going to be talking about no on 22 and yes on 23. We're going to hear from a couple key speakers who are leaders in these two important fights, and then we'll open it up for questions to discuss it a bit more. To talk to us about no on 22, I'm really honored to introduce an assembly member who I prefer to call my sister, who I had the opportunity to work with in the labor movement. She was in San Diego when I was in Los Angeles, had the opportunity to work with her and knew early on that she was a fighter for working people, for middle-class families. She is the chair of the Latino Caucus and the chair of the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Think about any important initiative that supports working families. Lorena Gonzalez has been at the center of that fight, not the least of which is ensuring the full expression of worker rights for those workers in the gig economy, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and so many others. And I know that we've got the opportunity to potentially see her in the future. 2022, I hear she's doing something around Secretary of State, I think. I heard something about that. So it's my honor and privilege to welcome our assembly member and my sister, Lorena Gonzalez.
Well, thank you, Rusty. And we have worked together a very long time, and I'm excited to be here with my fellow Democrats. What a trying time, but an exciting time. And so thank you for letting me come and explain a little bit about Proposition 22 and why it's on the ballot and what it does. So I'll just jump right into it. Proposition 22, just so people understand how we got here. In April of 2018, there was a Supreme Court decision called Dynamex. Dynamex basically said it was a unanimous bipartisan Supreme Court decision where the justices said, we have seen enough misclassification lawsuits for a lifetime. It's clear that the standard we're using is confusing, that businesses can skirt around it and workers don't know what their rights are. So we're gonna make it more simple. And they created a real simple ABC test. Basically, if you do the work of a company in their normal course of business and the company is utilizing you and has control over your work, that you're their employee. And as such, you're entitled to protections as an employee. we in the legislature took that decision, created a bill, been kind of controversial, called AB5. And what we really did with AB5 is try to figure out ways within existing law, within case law, within lawsuits, and within the Dynamex decision to say what things don't fit into this. What really are independent, when are independent contractors truly working as their own small businesses? Throughout that discussion, the gig companies, people like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash, tried to get an exemption. They tried to sell us on this idea that their drivers, their delivery drivers, rideshare drivers were their own small business. The problem was it never really fit. You know, when you look at that job classification, they're going where they're told to go, when they're told to go there. They have no ability to set their own rates, to negotiate their own fee with the driver, with the rider, if you will, or the person getting the delivery. They are completely under the control of the company and in no way really reflect what we think of as a small business or a small independent business. So there was no exemption granted. And these companies said, well, if we have to abide by basic labor laws, labor protections, which we've been avoiding for almost a decade, if not longer, then we will hold you up in court. We'll do other things. We'll start an initiative. So initially they put in $110 million to exempt themselves from basic labor protections that we expect of every mom and pop business in California. The requirement that you pay at least a minimum wage, that you pay overtime if somebody works over 8 hours a day or 40 hours in a week, the requirement that the employer contribute to a worker's social security fund, the requirement that employer contribute to the unemployment insurance fund and workers' compensation in case somebody gets hurt at work. The requirement that healthcare, if you're a large company and somebody is working full-time, is a right. The requirement that you provide paid sick days and provide the account for disability insurance and paid family leave. So they said, we don't want to do any of that. We want to set our own rules. They put in $110 million to start Proposition 22 to gather the signatures. Since then, they've added another 71 million. So now they have $181 million in a campaign fund. I think they've spent about $100 million of it. Basically to say we can't work in this environment. They often use really key words that, you know, the innovative economy, they call our labor laws outdated. We've had these discussions many times with them when we ask, well, what part of our labor laws are outdated? Do you think minimum wage is outdated? Social Security, unemployment insurance? What is the part that you're not comfortable with? And of course, that answer never comes because they're trying to write their own rules and take themselves out of all labor laws. Now they're trying to redefine the hours worked. Basically, they said, we'll pay a certain amount through this ballot initiative. They'll say, we'll pay a certain amount. However, only when the driver is going to pick up a customer or take them somewhere, or the driver is en route to deliver a package, not when they're waiting for their assignment. That seems odd. That's a new way of looking at things that could be very dangerous, obviously. They talk a little bit about a fund for healthcare, which probably very few of their drivers will ever actually be able to access. They talk about exempting themselves not just out of labor laws, but any regulation at the local and state level, including protections against sexual assault and harassment. You know, some of the background checks we'd like to see for drivers who are putting strangers into their car. They're really writing their own rules with Prop 22. And amazingly, we've never seen this on an initiative. They put in the initiative that for anything to change, it would take 7/8 of the legislature to vote through a change. So unlike most initiatives where, let's say, 3/4 or half of a vote of the legislature could change things that don't work in it, this would require 7/8 of the legislature to agree that things need to be changed. So as you can imagine, that's a hill that would never, we could never climb, to say the least. So this is what we're facing with. We're faced with really these multi-billion-dollar corporations who really have become wealthy off the backs of regular workers, writing their own rules, playing by their own rules and suggesting that they shouldn't have to abide by the very laws that we expect everybody else in California to abide by. And this affects, of course, not only those workers, that it has an effect obviously on them forever. They would be forever exempted, but it also affects all of us as taxpayers when a worker gets hurt on the job, if they're in an accident, maybe even hurt somebody else, unfortunately, on the job since they're driving without the requirement of workers' compensation insurance, that that person is uncovered. And that means we're all paying for those costs. When a company, these big gig companies aren't paying into our unemployment insurance fund, that fund becomes unfunded, right? Underfunded. It is now. We had to borrow about $400 million from the federal government. That loan is going to become due in 2 years. And the people that will have to pay back that loan, if this passes, will never be these companies who never paid into it, who they never paid into the fund. Instead, regular mom and pop businesses, law-abiding businesses are going to pay their weight, basically. So this is a proposition that hurts law-abiding businesses, people who play by the rules. It hurts companies that have long played by the rules and in fact had union workers like UPS who do deliveries. And it's important to note that under this proposition as well, these workers will never have the right to organize into a union. That's a critical part that's not spoken about a lot, because they would remain independent contractors, which by law can never form a union. So this really takes away from their rights, law-abiding businesses' rights, as well as us as taxpayers who end up footing the bill for the safety net for their workers. And that's Prop 22 in a nutshell.
All right, thank you, Assembly Member. Just that 5 minutes of a summation of Prop 22 makes it clear as to why the California Democratic Party took a position of no on Prop 22. We'll come back to you in just a few moments to answer a few more questions and get into some more detail. Next, I want to turn it to Steve Trossman, who is the Public Affairs Director for SEIU UHW, United Healthcare Workers West. He's also the president of the Fairness Project, which is a national nonprofit organization that's working with activists and leaders around the country to improve the standards for working people. When I think of a union that is on the forefront of organizing and fighting for not just workers within the healthcare industry, but really fighting for all workers in various parts of the country, I think of SEIU UHW. So with that, it's my honor to introduce Steve Trossman. Steve, can you just hold on 1 second? Let's make sure we get your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Okay.
Good to go. Thank you.
Yeah, so I thank you for the opportunity to present Proposition 23, the yes side. But I wanted to start by just explaining what dialysis is. Dialysis is a procedure for people who have what's called end-stage renal disease, which means that their kidneys are either not functioning or not functioning properly. And it's a procedure that is dangerous. A patient's blood is taken out of their bodies, it's cleaned, and then put back into their bodies. It has to be done 3 times a week at least, usually for 3 or 4 hours. And the only way you can stop getting dialysis is if you get a kidney transplant, and those are pretty rare. Even missing a dialysis treatment for 1 day is extremely dangerous. The dialysis business is run by mainly 2 large companies, one called DaVita and the other one called Fresenius. They operate about 70 to 75% of the clinics, not only in California, but across the country. They literally make billions of dollars. 2 years ago, between just those 2 companies, they made $4 billion in profits. And the problem is that they don't take some of that money and invest it back into the clinics to improve patient care and patient safety. People working in the clinics are paid barely more than minimum wage. They're under extreme pressure to maximize profits by rushing many patients at once through the treatment. So let me tell you just the 4 things that our initiative does. They're actually pretty simple. One is it requires that a physician or a nurse practitioner be on the premises anytime dialysis is being performed. Right now, there's no requirement that a doctor or advanced practice nurse be there, even though it's such a dangerous procedure. The second thing it requires is for the clinics to report data on their infection rates to the state so that it can be put into a website and easily accessed by patients so they can look at the various clinics in their area and have some information on how to make a choice on which one to go to. The third part is that in order for one of these companies to close a clinic, they have to justify that decision to the state. And this is particularly important in rural areas where if a clinic closes, it could mean somebody has to travel a long distance to be able to get this life-saving treatment. And the fourth thing it does is it prohibits clinics from discriminating against patients because of the type of insurance they have. I won't go into this too deep, but if you have private insurance, these companies charge way more for dialysis than if you're on Medicare, which most dialysis patients are. And so the clinics like to cherry pick the people who are on private insurance because they can make a lot more money on it, or they push people who are on Medicare to late at night or early in the morning. And this says that they can no longer know. The other thing does that holds all clinics accountable. Be required to have a doctor on site whenever patients are being treated. All clinics will be required to report their infection rates. All clinics will be required to meet all the requirements of Prop 23. And that's because if you live in a wealthier neighborhood right now under the current system, maybe your dialysis clinic will look like the shiny clinics that you'll see in the industry's commercials during this campaign. But if you're poor or in a rural area or live in a brown or black neighborhood, you're less likely to receive quality care at one of these clinics. This requires them all to meet the same high standards. The last thing I would say is that we believe that this initiative will push these clinics to significantly improve the hygiene in the clinics. The patients report seeing cockroaches, seeing flies, seeing blood stains, and this will require the clinics, by reporting the infection rates and having a doctor on premises to oversee the operation, we believe it will improve the clinic's performance by a lot. This is the last thing I would just say is that we ran an initiative in 2018 to improve dialysis care in California, and these companies spent $110 million to defeat it. It's the most that's ever been spent on by one side in a ballot initiative. This time around, they've already raised more money at this stage than they had 2 years ago. And the reason that they're willing to spend that much is because they make almost $500 million in profits, almost $470 million in profits in California alone. And so if you make that much money, it's worth spending $110 million to make sure you can keep making that kind of money. And that's what they're doing. It's money that just could be put back into the clinics to make things so much better. So we really are urging people to vote yes on this. We think it's important. These are some of the sickest people and most vulnerable people in the state, and they deserve to have the kind of clinics and the kind of treatment that will keep them safe and protect their health. So that's Prop 23.
Oh. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. And if you can bring back the good Assemblywoman back on the screen as well, we'll take some questions. from the audience, as well as some of our own. So first, question for you, Steve. I'll ask you first and then ask Marta to answer it second. So we know that so yes on 22 is supported by lots of money, and no on 23 is supported by lots of money. It's like you're like David and Goliath type fights. Can you both just share a little bit about who is opposing your campaign and who is supporting your campaign? Maybe it's Steve first, and then it's a member.
Yeah. The opposition is clearly these companies. These giant corporations. They're national corporations. Fresenius is actually headquartered in Germany, where they behave considerably different than they do in the United States. They pay people more. They don't run as many people through the clinics. It's a different situation. In fact, in Germany, dialysis has to be administered by a doctor. So it's not just having a doctor on the premises, they actually have to administer it. And they're doing it to protect their profits, pure and simple. It's very obvious. Supporting it is, of course, the Democratic Party in California, the State Federation of Labor, a number of individual unions, SEIU in the state, and we have a lot of support from patients and staff in the clinics.
I'm not sure. I think I'll go on to who's on each side of Prop 22. So the people behind Prop 22 are these gig companies. It's DoorDash, Postmates, Instacart, Uber, and Lyft. And they have spent, now they've put into their committee $181 million. That is the most that has ever been spent on an initiative campaign in the history of the United States. It's about a quarter of what President Obama used for his reelection, if that gives you some concept of how much money that really is. That's why you see so many commercials. They have just donated of that $181 million, $2 million to the California Republican Party. So we assume, of course, that the California Republican Party is, I think, yes, on Prop 22. As far as the no side, it's pretty clear. The no side is the California Democratic Party, the California Labor Federation, every union you can imagine, the rideshare drivers who have come together themselves in their groups and organizations, Gig Workers United, Rideshare Drivers United. There's a number of gig worker collectives that oppose this, as well as nearly every, I think, candidate who ran on the Democratic side for president, everybody from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they all oppose Prop 22. Any statewide elected official who has taken a position has taken a no position, and most local elected and state elected officials as well on the Democratic side. So it's pretty clear.
Thank you, and I want to give a shout out to Erica Meghetto and who was attending. She says, "My name is Erica Meghetto, and I'm a Lyft Uber driver of nearly 4 years. I'd like to thank the panel for the support of workers and ask for us to vote no on Prop 22 to protect me and my fellow drivers." So it's an example of who you're talking about. Another question for you, as a member: what about the arguments that Uber are just gig workers? So I guess like what is, and I'm sure you're hearing that a lot. People are saying it is different. What do people say in response to that?
First of all, I'm not sure what that means, just a gig worker. Every worker deserves a basic level of respect and rights. And in California, our rights extend to part-time workers. We've made that conscientious decision to ensure that part-time workers are protected the same way that full-time workers are. Now, that being said, a majority of rides that are actually given, and a majority of deliveries actually made are being made by full-time, if you will, gig workers. So it might be sold as kind of this part-time thing here and there where I can make a couple of dollars extra. The majority of the work being done is overwhelmingly being done by people who are doing it full-time. The other thing we have to remember is a lot of jobs in California, a lot of jobs in the United States that were once considered gig work are now careers, and that's because of the work we've done through federal labor law back in the 1930s, all the way through primarily the work of unions and ensuring that all work, in fact, is dignified. Construction work was once thought of course, as gig work. You know, we have the entertainment industry that was once thought of as gig work, highly unionized, highly protected work in a number of fields. Even some folks like our longshoremen who, you know, were traditionally go down to the docks and see what was available to unload became a career opportunity, a middle class career opportunity for those folks who did it through the labor movement and through organizing those into actual real protected jobs. And that's what we're trying to do here.
That's a great perspective to provide for that context about how the work has changed over a century. So thank you for that perspective. Steve, question for you. Will the two companies close the clinics in the poor areas because of Prop 23, thereby making treatment more difficult to get?
Yeah, so I would describe this as the go-to move by the dialysis industry whenever, and not just in California, but across the country, whenever there's a proposal to either regulate them or force them to change their behavior, they immediately start saying this is going to cause clinics to close and people aren't going to be able to get treatment. And it just hasn't proven to be true. In states that have imposed ratios, the number of clinics has grown. During the pandemic, they claim to have lost $30 or $40 million. That has not gotten them to close clinics. And that was one of the reasons we built into the initiative that they can't close a clinic unless the state agrees that agrees to it. And so they have to justify it to the state. Even in poor areas or rural areas, even though the clinics may not be as shiny as they are in other neighborhoods, they're still profitable. And these companies could easily do the things that are in Prop 23 and they'll be fine. They'll still be making hundreds of millions of dollars. So we believe it's just a scare tactic. And frankly, to my way of thinking, a little disgusting to kind of use patients as kind of a pawn to make their argument to not spend some of their billions of dollars to improve conditions in the clinics.
Thank you. A question for you, Assembly Member. And actually, there are two questions that are kind of on the same topic. One person says, my neighbor, an Uber driver, just yesterday insisted that I vote yes because she claims that she won't be able to make nearly as much money. It does seem that it will depress their incomes. Any thoughts on that? Another related question was, will Lyft drivers still be able to set their own hours? Will they be able to set their own territories? Pick who to pick up? Will the price of rides go up?
So those are great questions, and I think really reflect the campaign of lies, quite honestly, by these companies. First of all, an independent study by the University of California at Berkeley Labor Center showed that under the initiative, what is guaranteed as a floor would be about $5.64 an hour. That's how much a driver would be guaranteed to make. Now, in all of California, the minimum wage is $13 an hour, and in some cities higher than that, all the way up to $15 an hour. On top of that, as employees, they're guaranteed expenses. So that would be, I think the federal rate right now for mileage is about 58 cents a mile. They would get that on top of the minimum rate, and also have the 7.5% of Social Security and Medicare that the employer has to take care of, taken care of right now. The worker themselves have to pay that fee. So overall, it's clear. And quite honestly, if Uber and Lyft thought that they would be making less money under the law, or workers would be making less money under current labor law, they wouldn't be fighting this so much. So I think it's clear that the worker protections that would be in place would benefit the worker financially, absolutely. As far as flexibility, you know, this is the one argument that these companies are keen in on. There is nothing in the ballot initiative that guarantees that these workers will continue to have flexibility, that they'll continue to be able to set their own time and rates. And there's nothing in California law that prevents it for a worker. So it's funny that that has become kind of the key point, because the ability to work where you want, the hours you want, is always up to the employer and up to demand, quite honestly. There are a lot of drivers who will tell you that the true flexibility in the job is really limited by the app itself, you know, where they're sending you at what time for how much, and that, you know, you actually, the way they get you to work full hours and longer hours, and often more than 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours a day, is by incentivizing the pay that way. So already there's a question of how much flexibility workers actually have under the current model, under the app-based model, but there's nothing that needs to be changed as far as the flexibility. There's nothing that the state law requires, and quite honestly, it wouldn't, I wouldn't believe, fit their business model to create shift work. It would just mean that when people are working, that they'd be paid for that work.
Thank you. Next question for both of you. This is from Susan Guarino. You know, it's like, what are other states doing in response to these two issues of really protecting workers in certain industries? And so, what are other states doing well to regulate dialysis, and an umbrella of protections for drivers? So maybe Steve, go first, and then the committee member.
Yeah, so the main thing that we've seen that other states have done that is not currently being done in California is to create ratios. So you have to have X number of patient care technicians or other personnel in the clinic, you know, per patient, per number of patients. There's about 7 states, I believe, that have ratios. Oddly enough, they're in some states that you wouldn't expect to have that kind of stuff, like Texas and Georgia. So I would say that's the main thing. But these companies, many of the states that they operate in don't have ballot initiative procedures. So the only way to make these kinds of changes is to go through the legislature. And they have just huge war chests to be able to spend on lobbyists and lawyers and to stop these kinds of common sense changes that would improve things for patients. So it's very difficult to make these kinds of changes. You know, the California legislature is different than most states in that, you know, you can actually pass progressive legislation. We have done that as well, but the ballot initiative gives us a direct way to make change, and it's only available in 24 states, and frankly, there's 5 states where it's so difficult to do that it's really only available in 19 states out of 50. So it's been very hard for people to make, you know, these kinds of changes in other states. And I'd say ratios is the most common.
As far as other states and protecting independent contractors or gig workers in other states, woefully little, unfortunately. California does have the strongest worker protections in the nation, and once again, we're leading, and that's why the fight is here. However, the Attorney General of Massachusetts have sued these companies the same way that our Attorney General did, to say that they're misclassifying their drivers under their law. They have a very similar law as we do to determine employee status. The state of New Jersey's Unemployment Insurance Fund have sued these companies because they didn't pay into that. They have the same test as we use here in California to determine unemployment insurance. So we do have lawsuits moving up and down the nation. Unfortunately, just yesterday, the Trump Department of Labor, the labor board has actually loosened up their idea of what constitutes an independent contractor, allowing for construction workers and janitorial workers and rideshare drivers under federal law to be determined independent contractors, even in cases you would never really suggest that they were running a company. That's why it's so important we are able to stabilize the law here in California, because we will lead the nation. The federal government, the board cannot upend state law. It is just guidance. And so it's really important that we really set the guideline here in California. And as we've seen after we passed AB 5, is a number of countries have actually adopted the same type of standard. And we see Uber fighting for its life in countries across, around the world, really, who are all saying the same thing. Your drivers are not independent contractors, they're employees. And depending on what that means in each country, they need to be treated that way.
Well, we're leading the state because of your leadership here in California. So thank you for all you're doing. Question for you, Steve, from Teresa Beaucamp. With severe shortages of physicians and nurse practitioners and requiring physicians and nurse practitioners on site, won't this proposition decrease access and increase costs to patients? The California Medical Association and California NAACP both oppose Prop 23.
Yeah, so first of all, we understand that there could actually be a surplus of particularly general practitioner doctors in California in future years. And one of the things we built into this initiative is the ability to have a nurse practitioner. I should have said also a physician assistant. So somebody with advanced medical training. And if a doctor's not available or if there's a shortage, we built in a safety valve so that you can still have a higher level of supervision in the clinics. But if it was impossible for it to be a doctor, there's a way to achieve that. I want to say that, this is really important. The kind of complications that people have during dialysis are severe. People have heart attacks. They have major fluctuations in blood pressure. They have bleeding problems. It's not uncommon for people to pass out during this procedure. It takes a huge toll on the body. We did a study of 911 calls from dialysis clinics in Los Angeles County, and literally there are thousands of 911 calls, most for medical emergencies from dialysis clinics. It's not unusual for someone to get off dialysis and be told that they should go directly to the emergency room because of their condition. This is not like this is not a game. This is really serious. And the other thing is that dialysis patients tend to be very sick people. They tend to have other diseases and what they call comorbidities. And so having a doctor on the premises to be able to observe them, to see them, week to week, and to be able to oversee the hygiene in the clinics, it's just we believe it's extremely important, and that we should do everything we can to make sure that people are protected.
Thank you. And then a follow-up question from my good friend Alexis Beeman. Some dialysis patients are given permission by their doctor to self-administer the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Does this proposition require that they hire an at-home health worker?
I'm sorry, the last part, could you say again?
Does Prop 23 require that they hire a home health worker?
No. Home dialysis is becoming more and more popular. It's less expensive. A lot of people think it's better and safer. Interestingly enough, these companies have totally cornered the dialysis market. They make the machines that administer it. They make the drugs that they administer during dialysis. They've cut deals with a lot of the nephrologists, the kidney doctors, and made joint ventures with them. And they make a lot of the equipment that people use at home. So they do pretty well under the home dialysis piece of this too. But this particular initiative does not require a home health, nurse or personnel at all.
Thank you. Okay, question for you, Assembly Member. Wally Waldau asks, the ads say that 4 or 5 drivers want to remain independent contractors. Is that accurate?
You know, first of all, I'm not really sure where they're getting that 4 or 5 number from. There have been, we have seen where the employers themselves are asking in the app, the driver, if they oppose Prop 22 or support it. You can imagine being asked by your employer who's spending hundreds, over $100 million on a political campaign, what your position is on that, and how that might turn out, no matter what your position is. There have been some, I think, discussion with drivers that's been based around, do you want to maintain flexibility, and the inappropriate, I think, inaccurate statement that this is the only way you can have flexibility. But there is also a division, and what we don't have is the actual data on drivers who are doing this full time. The majority of rides we know are being given by drivers who are doing this full time. And, you know, we're not really sure where that number comes from, to be honest. What I can tell you is this: 5,000 drivers filed for wage claims at our California Department of Labor. Now they had to take all those wage claim violations and they're suing the companies. So I know there are thousands of drivers out there who are self-organized, who have worked hard to really push the campaign of No on Prop 22, who testified in support of AB 5 in the legislature and who have been self-organizing for a long time. So I find it highly suspect that 4 and 5 are wanting to continue to be exempted from all basic labor protections.
And this question is for both of you. It's not from any audience members, from me, really. And this is more of a broader question about the state of workers' rights in California. You know, if we're successful in stopping 22 and successful in passing 23, especially against these huge corporate interests, what does that mean for the state of workers' rights in California? Like, what else do we need to do? What does this mean for workers? I love your perspective. First, you, Assembly Member.
Well, I think I would flip that with Prop 22. What happens if Prop 22 passes? Number one, we know that large, very wealthy corporations can write their own rules. That's scary. People are talking about this in terms of the future of work. I prefer to think about the future of workers. Do we all want to concede that if you're hired by an app on this phone right here, you give up all rights that we've worked decades and decades to bring together? I sure hope not. But that's a fight that will have to continue, of course, if Prop 22 is successful. I'm sure we'll be fighting next time a proposition by Amazon, who decides their warehouse workers should be piece rate, gig workers. We continue to see the depletion of workers' rights nationally, and California has been able, at least in the last few years, to really push back on that and to protect more. We just passed, ensured we have the strongest leave policies for new moms and for people who have to take care of a sick loved one. All of this could go away. And so it's important that we hold on to what we've done and continue to push for more workers' rights. In all reality, although we do very well in California, it is nothing compared to other industrialized countries around the world. We still are far behind. We still have barriers and blocks to the right to unionize. And we know this: if companies can, by initiative, not allow workers to unionize, we are all screwed. And I hate to say that, because there is one group of people in California and in this nation who have ensured that basic labor rights are protected, and that's our unions. And even though they're not what they used to be, and even though California has stronger unions than other places, we need to continue to grow the labor movement. It's the only organized counterbalance to massive corporations, and as income inequality increases, they're our last best hope. And so, of course, former labor organizer and leader here, a true believer, but I also, the data proves that. And so this is an important vote for the future of all work, for the future of Social Security, for the future of unemployment insurance, for the future of workers' compensation, minimum wage, and overtime. This is all of our fights, even though we may not ourselves be drivers.
I still have my union card from my first job as a grocery, as a bag boy, UFCW local 1167. So I'm feeling the vibe, Steve.
And I think a lot of people got their first taste of unions working in grocery stores and being a member of UFCW. Yeah, I mean, we're already, just since, 2016, the Labor Department has already made all sorts of rules changes and others that make it much, much more difficult to organize. They're definitely tilting what was already a tilted playing field in the direction of employers to give them a greater ability to oppose unionization. It's undeniable that in the last 40 years, pretty much ever since what older people like me remember was the PATCO strike in the early 80s, when Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers, and that started sort of an open season on workers and unions in a way that we had never seen before. And that has continued, and under the current administration, it has accelerated. And I think, as the Assembly member said, if you go across the border in Canada, it's not it's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than it is here, and that's true in almost every democracy in the world. Has a much stronger protections for working people than we do in the United States.
And so we have a few more questions. I want to ask a question about the state of the campaign, getting involved, and then do a little bit of a lightning round where I'm going to ask a bunch of questions very quickly. So we try to get through all of them, okay? So the first one, so to you, Assembly Member, so there are once a week phone banks, at least that the party is doing, to support both initiatives. And you mentioned before that there is a lot of money on the other side. Can you say what the campaign is doing and what people can do to help?
That's a great question. I hope that the campaign will put something in the chat so everybody can just link right in. It'll be a lot easier, but we suggest people volunteer through the party. It is a lot of money. There's no question about that. But today we have good news. Despite them having spent $100 million already, only 39% of Californians right now are yes on Prop 22. That means we can still win this. It's 39-36. It's really, there's a lot of undecideds, and we just need to get that word out. People don't like big corporations exempting themselves from basic rules. And so I encourage you to of course, through the party, donate your time, but also, social media is huge. You can sign up to volunteer, but you can also just make a concerted effort to talk about this with family and friends. There's so much misconception. Obviously, every time you turn on the television, every time you turn on any kind of social media, there's an app that pops up. I mean, that's what they're spending $2 million a day. I don't think I've ever seen this much. Well, I haven't. Nobody's seen this much money spent in California. So we need to counteract that with grassroots support and with continuing to tell people not to let these big corporations win, whether it's the dialysis centers or whether it's the gig companies.
Steve?
Yeah, I would echo just about everything the Assembly member said. You can go to our website, which is yesonprop23.com, yesonprop23.com, and get a lot more information and find ways to connect with the campaign, talk to your friends, your neighbors, your family about voting for this. As I said, these are literally some of the most medically vulnerable people in our state, and the average life's death rate for people who are on dialysis, over half don't. About 25% die in the first year that they're on dialysis, and over half die within 5 years. That's how sick they are and how dangerous this procedure is. So. They desperately need our help to improve these clinics and to get their treatment better. I know people don't necessarily like to hear this, but the fatality rates, the death rates in other countries is much lower than this country, and It's because these companies have a stranglehold hold on this industry, and their primary focus is on squeezing as much money as they possibly can out of it. And we believe that patients pay the price and their families.
Okay, time for lightning round. Some of these questions are a little bit big. I'm trying to make them smaller so it can be a faster answer. Okay, so here's one from Kenneth Mejia, Prop 23. Are clinics currently required to report infection rates to any governing body?
Yes, they're required to report infection rates to the federal government. The problem with it is that it's very hard to get at that data. It's not readily available to consumers. If somebody really wanted to get it, they probably could get it, but they would have to really work at it. This will make it very easy for people to get information. And one other thing that I'll say is the fact that they already collect the data means that it's not hard to then give the data to the state as well. So, because they already do it, but this will make it a lot easier for consumers and patients.
Got it. From Dana Berklow, I see many drivers who drive for both Lyft and Uber. How would they be employees of more than one company at a time? Are they treated as part-time by each company and thus not given full benefits?
So they could work for two companies the same way anyone under California law can work for two competing companies. You can have a part-time job at McDonald's and Burger King. That is the California law. So they can in fact work for multiple companies and be part-time employees. And if you look at some of our unionized gig work, if you will, stagehands, for example, they may have a different employer of record almost every single day. And yet still they're giving the benefits of being employed, and their benefits come through as a part-time worker and add up obviously those hours together.
I think we may have answered, you may have answered this already, Steve, but I'm not exactly certain. Because there's a shortage of physicians and medical personnel, wouldn't this limit the number of hours, would Prop 23 limit the number of hours and time periods available to patients?
We don't think so. As I said, there's actually projections that show that there will be a surplus of particularly general practitioners. These do not have to be nephrologists who are in the clinics. They're not the people who are prescribing dialysis. They're there to be there for an emergency and to oversee the operations. Because don't forget, these clinics are understaffed, and the staff there is literally running from machine to machine. And then if a person's having a problem and they have to focus on that, it doesn't allow them the time to be able to observe, to be able to make sure that procedures are being done right, to make sure that hygiene is being done right. And so we believe that there will be plenty of medical personnel, and the fact that they can use nurse practitioners or physician assistants if they have to, we think will make this not a problem. The other thing is that these companies only make money if they're doing dialysis on patients. So they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that they run as many people through these clinics as they currently do.
Okay. A study member, so there have been a few people asked, it's not about Prop 22 directly, but about AB 5 more broadly. And I thought maybe you want to take a chance to talk to Democrats about it. They're asking about actors and technicians. Do you want to speak to that for AB 5?
Well, we have had a lot of discussions with the entertainment community in general. Be happy to have some more. There are very strong feelings, obviously, from the unions that represent our stagehands, our technicians, our actors, Actors Equity, SAG-AFTRA, and a number of unions that actually work within the employment field. But we have continued to talk about different prospects as far as community theater, true community theater versus you know, just a larger nonprofit. And we can continue those discussions with everybody at the table.
And probably the last question for you, for a member, somebody said, is labor calling for the no on 22 because they're not in this person's county?
Well, I know the individual unions are doing a labor to neighbor campaign. I've been on a number of phone calls, getting union members whipped up on it. So I know those phone calls are happening. I know those communications are going on. You know, obviously, if in that county it's not, let us know. We'll continue to push our local labor councils and our unions that aren't doing that work. But I know for a fact, because I've been on so many of these phone calls, that there is a lot of that work being done. And of course, our efforts at the party, which are essential.
Well, I want to thank you both for your time. We can't get to every single question, but we hope you guys learn a little bit more about why you should vote no on 22 and yes on 23, so we can be able to protect workers' rights in California. The California Democratic Party has endorsed both of those positions. Actually, before we kind of close, let's make sure we give a give like some, let's see in the chat the applause for Steve and a family member, or let's give them some love, please, for all their great work to protect workers. And on Thursdays, the California Democratic Party does have our Prop Talk Thursdays, where you can make phone calls from home safely, and it's fun. We'll put the link in the chat. Esteban has put the link in the chat. You can see. You can sign up for those Prop Talks. And there's also you can see a little bit more about it here on the slide that's now on the screen. And also every Wednesday, so next Wednesday, we're talking about Props 14, 18, and 19. And then the following Tuesday, we'll be talking about Prop 15 and 16. We couldn't keep it on the Wednesday because on October 7th is the vice presidential debate with our good California Senator and future VP Kamala Harris and that other person. So make sure you join us next Wednesday for our next Prop Talk, and we hope that you sign up for State Prop Thursdays, because at the end of the day, while social media is fantastic, while talking to your friends is amazing, talking to voters is what helps us to win. So thank you very much, Assembly Member Lorena Gonzalez and Steve Troutman, for talking to the party to help us to be more informed about the initiative. Everyone have a wonderful night, and remember to stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.